Burgess and Bolton's weekly wrap-up.
Hello, Ben. No, you're there, Ben.
I'm there. Hi, Jeremy.
Hello, how are you? I can't see you.
I'm good. I'll just turn my camera on and off again.
Okay. Hello and welcome everybody to this week's edition of Burgess and Bolton's weekly wrap-up, where we look at everything to do with the London market, technology, change, and this week we're looking specifically at claims. We're going to review the London Market Claims conference that happened last week, some of the key insights that we took away from it, and perhaps some of the things to look forward to in the next in the next series of events around London Market Claims. But to begin with, let me just apologise if you hear any banging or whatnot. I'm in the middle of a solar
storm.
Yeah, and there's a lot of banging and drilling going on. But anyway, I'll talk about that later. But I thought we'd kick off with a bit of news, Ben. I saw this that Howden buys Aston Lock, and I thought this was an interesting bit of news because obviously we've been talking about M&A on the show for a bit, especially the failed deal over the summer, and you kind of juxtaposition that to kind of almost a success story of Howden and their acquisition trail, and it's all about scale. So this again, interesting comment from David Howden on the reasons for the acquisition around expansion of operations in Europe and expanding rapidly in Asia Pacific region. They obviously see scale as being an important element of being able to compete in the new world. And yeah, we talked about it before, so I just thought I'd flag it up and just see what you thought about that.
Yeah, I think it's the scramble has happened, hasn't it, since particularly the Aon deal fell apart, and now we've got this kind of middle group saying we've got to have scale, and that's more, I think, about the competition between the group in the middle, between the McGills and so on, and the Locktons all working hard. This is Howden's paid a high price for this. Some commentators are saying it's quite a risky move for him. He's not averse to risk, obviously. David Howden, he's a buccaneering kind of chief exec, which is great. But you know, look, it's good. It's more consolidation. It's more people saying, look, at the timing's right to own share in the market, and don't worry about the profitability. That'll come later on.
Yeah.
It means that competition is ratcheting up again all the time, and we keep on saying this, but it doesn't really matter whether you focus right at the top end or you're focused in the middle. The consolidation we'll just keep on going, I think, because share does really matter. Yeah, it really does, because there's an efficiency from scale, and there are deals to be done. So that, you know, part of this is cutting certain deals on renewals, and it sort of reflects the other side, if you like, of technology, which is that you could just do all this stuff, vanilla type stuff online, but in the broking world, it's, well, you can, but we have to have people selling it out there, you know, and it's something we talked about quite a while ago and haven't done for a while, but you have to sell insurance. Yeah. So as much as we talk a lot of, and we'll talk today a bit about the efficiencies of the process, most insurance still has to sort of be sold in some way, you know, shape or form.
Yeah, definitely. And I think what's also interesting about their kind of acquisition trail, and perhaps one of the reasons why it's been a success, is if you look at the people in the key roles, and just building on your technology point, I know the CIO there, Lynn Grobler, who is not an insurance person per se. She was the CIO at BP and has got a very much organizational transformation background, and deals, and when you speak to her, talks quite a lot about the people and cultural elements around change and transformation. So, and in this environment, I'm sure she's she's able to, when those acquisitions happen, bring them together in a way that really does kind of find those operational efficiencies that you were talking about. And quite often in M&A, we took another, you look at the case studies over the years, that the synergies that are put together at the beginning of the deal, they just never come to fruition because the cultural elements of the two organizations come together and actually they're just a clash. And that really does need a lot of thought and then a lot of work to make it happen. It isn't just about mashing different technology stacks together and then it just all happens.
Definitely not. It's about people, and Hadden's a people person, and he's always said that the talent is the thing that matters. That is what others say in the market. So I think this middle group, if you like, this middle tier of brokers, I think they're all about the service and the people and the customer. And that's, they're buying into the people. Obviously, there will be some rationalization as that process happens inevitably. And they're also about their brands as well, what they represent, both to pick the talent that they recruit and the customers. So it's really interesting if you compare it with the big three, but particularly Marsh and Aon. I mean, they are such monster organizations that they fulfill a certain type of purpose in the market, in the global market for broking. And some people will argue there's too much power in those two organizations or three organizations, but actually these players are now saying there are alternatives, and in decent sized organizations as well. We've still got some of the scale that you need and the coverage internationally, because that will be the stumbling block for the big deals, is to say, well, if you can't do our D&O all around the world, or you can't do the property portfolio, then we'll just go to one of the big boys and they'll do it for us. It's a very administrative business as well in lots of ways still.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, we'll keep an eye on that. Right. So let's move things on to our kind of review of London Market Claims. So London Market Claims is a conference that I put on with the Insurance Network, the other side of me, and if you like, and it's very much about bringing together actually the whole value chain to talk about how we can improve claims performance for clients, but also find those efficiencies that we've just been talking about as well within the claims sphere. So we had a number of sessions over the course of the day that were trying to really start a discussion and debate about how you can overcome some of the practical challenges to make this stuff real. So we thought we'd just pick out a few kind of highlights from it, just chat about what we found and what we thought some of the outcomes might be, and then as I say, we can then look forward to how we might carry them forward and make a real difference. So that's it. So I just thought I would and that's all of us there. So great turnout. It was great. It was great to see everyone, wasn't it, Ben? And that's why I put that up.
It was strange. It was a bit daunting actually to speak on a stage again with all those people. Haven't done that for a while. Haven't practiced it, and quite a few others said the same to me. But it was great. Yeah, it was really good.
I saw on LinkedIn as well. You put it was quite exhausting. I thought it was not exhausting in a bad way, but it was just like, oh God, I haven't done this for ages. Kind of.
Oh yeah, no, I mean physically exhausted. I mean, physically, I felt really tired. I mean, I did have quite a long day, to be fair, but it you stand up a long time, on these things, which I'd forgotten about. I thought, because I was, you go from one sesh to the next, and then you're standing up and talking to people in the networking areas and things, and you go out in the evening, you're standing up, and you find you've stood up for like 12 hours. So it was. Yeah. I'd also think I'd broken my toe the night before as well, which was adding insult to injury. But it was it was interesting. I think people were kind of finding their way a little bit as well around the whole thing. There's probably too much, kind of repetitive talk about all that sort of thing, and you wanted to get onto some of the claims stuff, but that's people for you, isn't it? Yeah,
it is. So I just thought we did, as we do with all the events, we run a pre-event survey. So we just ask all the attendees a few questions just so we can shape the program. This is quite an interesting one. Just what's your claims priorities for this year and into next year? The reason I put it up is because meeting changing client expectations has come out top, along with building digital capabilities within claims, and we've talked about a bit about this, Ben, and actually in our opening talk, or your opening talk, we talked about whether meeting changing expectations, client expectation, what that actually meant. Do people really understand what those expectations are, and are they changing, and how much of this is all talk, and how much of it is action, if you want. And I'm just going to bring your slides up. Yeah, and these are some of the ones that you ran through.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, I won't go through the whole talk again, but I think, we were picking out from some of the surveys what we'd seen, and all of this is through the COVID pandemic period. So the basic message was that service was down right across the board. London had been quite resilient, which we talked about before, but it was all about responsiveness and communication. And then if you compare that, the conference survey with our broker surveys, managing clients' expectations does come up there, but at a lower level. So there's a more practical sort of service issue that was going on. So that was, and everywhere we've seen a whole bunch of things, and at the bottom there's hardening markets. So there's quite a number of things happening, but a lot of them are quite negative. So there's a lot of negative forces, if you like, within those challenges, which must make it. And then with people working from home, which I also spoke about, it does make it. It must be tough, for people apart from anything else,
Yeah. And then we talked a little bit about this. I was just going to skip forward actually to your the two on the index, which we've spoken about before, but it's got a downward trend, but there is definitely a.
Yeah, I mean, it was on a bit of a downward trend before, which was back to the beginning of 2018. So we've seen the market just gradually going down gently. Obviously with a few movements there, that marine market for some reason went up, but generally speaking, it's kind of all ended up in about the same place, which is fair average overall, and some of the classes well below where they were pre-COVID. So it's just all, there's no way where you can see anything going up, which is again quite tough for a market.
Yeah.
And then if you go into the next one, I think, which is this volatility index. Now this matters because this is about the consistency of service across all players. And this isn't to say, because someone came up to me afterwards and said, "Oh, I have some really good service," and of course people do, because there are some really good players at the top and some who are not so good, and there's a whole range which you'd always get. But what we're looking at really here is the changing sort of face, or the changing quantum, if you like, of inconsistency or volatility, as we call it. So what this shows is it really did jump up in 2020. So in other words, brokers are experiencing inconsistent service from the range of players that they use, which means that customers will have the same experience. They'll be, one day it could be good, one day it could be terrible, and one day it could be average.
Yeah.
But the point was also here was, where has it settled? It's sort of settled above the COVID period. So it's not over. And you could say, someone has written in one of our reports, casting a long shadow. My other thought, though, is whether it's just sort of settled above anyway, because there's this perceptual change, is that, there's a lot of things that are not that positive at the moment, that aren't pushing things in the right direction. So I was really like a big negative kind of wet blanket on the cheer them all up when they came back. I don't think they'd ever want to come to a conference again after I did this. So
no, we did finish on a positive though, didn't we? To say that actually this presents an opportunity to
yeah, because you have to, don't you? Otherwise, you'd kind of slit your throat at the end of all of this one. But yeah, no, you do. I agree. I mean, I think there is. I generally think that you hit a point at which you have to change and you have to do something. Hopefully, this is it. We do say that every year, but hopefully, this is it where things do start to shift a bit.
Yeah.
You know, and I gave this example of a great restaurant thing to try and draw some analogies with really what I said was that what I'd hoped when we were in the period pre-COVID of getting to sort of quite a lot of the basics were getting there in place, that the phases were sort of an operational phase, then a sort of basic service phase where things got improved. And I think the next phase must be an innovation phase. So, and I reflect a bit on that, thinking, well, maybe we talk too much about we still talk too much about the kind of operational, not a little bit about the service, you know, when we talk about client expectations, but we don't really know what those expectations are. And in fact, I asked Matthew Moore that question in the keynote, and he said, yes, we don't know enough about customers. And he was talking generally, not just claims. And their expectations. So it's all right for people to say, oh, those expectations are changing, but what expectations are they? And what are we aiming at to improve or meet? You know, and I think that's really where we start to talk about innovation. And I don't see why you can't start innovating, really, even if everything isn't perfect. There's a bit, often, particularly operational outfits will say, we've got to get everything just right before we move on to the next stage. They have a linear, sequential view of the world, which I don't think is what businesses do. You know, talking about Howden just says, I don't care, I'm just going to grow for scale, right? So he's spent £1 billion or $1 billion on an acquisition. He's just going to make it work. He's not waiting for everything to be perfect. He's saying the bigger picture is we've got to get on with scale and get share and get, you know, build a business. And that's the sort of brave kind of type of dynamic thinking. And innovation isn't technology, by the way. It's just dynamism. It's getting on with things. It's getting things done. So that's what I would like to see going forward, more of that rather than more of the kind of introspective, you know, stuff that we'll talk about a bit in a second, which is what's going on with the digital spine, or what's going on with the ones and the zeros and the drones and these sort of things. They're quite small circles, really, compared with, you know, smashing it out of the park.
So let's have a look at some of the sessions. So I've just picked out a couple of key things. This was I think one of the most popular sessions, the Blueprint 2 and market modernization. You can see there people chatting at the round tables, and that's what I want to kind of highlight, I think, in my summary of what this session really told us. I think firstly is that it's too early for Lloyd's and the future at Lloyd's to give us that roadmap that I think that people are desperately wanting, so they can see how it's going to impact their organizations. And to be fair, that's probably understandable, given that the deal between DXC and the future at Lloyd's has only just been struck. Now, whether you think that's a good or a bad approach in terms of timing, you know, that's a different story. But I think what did come out of the round tables that is a positive is that firstly that ECF2, you know, did work over COVID, and it has given a platform to perhaps look at digital and digital technologies and how they're used within claims in a new light. And we've talked about that before, about how COVID might just break down some of the naysayers and the mindset barriers around embracing digital more. The other thing that was a positive was that it's obvious that ECF2 is too rigid, and there needs to be much more flexibility in whatever comes next. So that's good. there is agreement around that. And just to pick up on your thing around the digital spine and data, I think the feeling in the room was that's a good starting point. That ability to be able to plug in and out as well of a kind of a centralized data, depending on what your organization and your claim service looks like, was a good thing. But as always, the devil's in the detail, and I think we'll just have to wait. I think, and I think that's the main problem. I think people are
and it is disappointing. You feel like you're a kind of hostage to this. This is my kind of personal view. Is I feel like people are a bit hostage to this whole process now, which is moving out further all the time. There was a question to the Lloyd's people about, what about timetables? And they said, well, we're agile, so we don't have timetables, which is news to me. I thought you always had timetables, regardless of what process you had. But anyway, I don't think my clients would like that.
Sounds like a Arriva bus service. I mean, they have a timetable, but I'll tell you what, it doesn't work.
It's agile. They turn up when they need to, when they fancy it.
Yeah.
So there was some strange sort of things out of that I just feel a sense of bit as sort of deja vu. And to my earlier point, it's holding people back with an operational discussion, as if the operational stuff is the only thing that matters, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
Guess what? People still run claims teams. Still, people are paying claims. People are still getting on with all this stuff in their day jobs. And then I think they turn up to things like this and say, what's happening? And they hear, oh, nothing very much. So what do? Go back to the day job and get on with it. I think if they don't get on with it, the innovation is just going to happen elsewhere. It's going to be taken away, and it'll just be people get fed up with it.
Yeah, I agree. So that was a little bit about the Blueprint 2. So this was a really interesting session, and actually just plays in around cyber, about a bit of news this week. I think it was yesterday as well, that you spotted. Here it is.
Yeah.
So inside it, shedding light on organized chaos in cyber. And you tell us about this, and then I'll just give you kind of
So this is there's been quite a lot of talk this week about cyber. This is a survey that has been published in the Insider in full article here, a feature article that they do, and it basically says that there's this huge there's loss ratios are getting worse in terms of attritional losses, particularly for ransomware claims. So the industry is trying to respond and react to that, and I think the question here is, are they on the front foot, are they on the back foot, and does this ultimately look like a market that's sustainable, which is the fundamental question about cyber, which this article doesn't actually answer. It does say that at the end there's enough to see that coverage, for example, is settling down. So this coverage is quite similar across the board, which I suppose may be a good thing if everybody's settled on what they need to cover and not cover. But also they're saying at the same time that pricing is all over the place, really, that nobody really is pricing this stuff on a consistent basis. So that all adds up to this idea that they call it organized chaos. It feels still a bit Wild West in some ways to me. The comment in the middle of the article talks about all sorts of different ways in which carriers are trying to manage this market. Beazley, they said, is basically just trying to manage it through the client lens, through more assessment of the customer, as it were, I think is their main thing, as opposed to some kind of policy-based control with and different excess arrangements and so on. I don't know. I mean, it doesn't look like anybody's got an answer, but the point is the losses are going up, and if there isn't an insurance solution, at the end of all of this, because carriers are losing too much money, then this will be a big gap, I think, in the industry.
Yeah, go on.
And just in the offering, and then I was only going to just mention that CFC, the MGA, who are probably the most famous for their cyber product, and have grown that out pretty substantially. Have just had a major investment this week, so the top line is going to grow. There's going to be more and more sold of this stuff. So the appeal is still great to write for top line, but this article also is drawing attention to the kind of pretty worrying trends underneath, really, that are going on.
And so what? And I'll just kind of give an insight from the conference as well, because Beazley were speaking and leading this session. So they were saying it was incredible the amount of attacks, firstly, that were taking place. And that what seems to be quite a innocuous kind of attack, it might be a denial of access or whatever, so rapidly snowballs into something where you've lost data and you're being held to ransom. And quite often the only way out of that is to actually pay the ransom. And so there's kind of this self-perpetuating cycle where they pay the ransom, it reinforces the behavior of the criminals, and so they carry on doing it. And I think what they were saying in the workshop particularly was something's got to break that, and it's not going to be that cycle, and it's not going to be the insurance industry. Governments are going to have to start stepping in soon, because we had it, when was it, 2 years ago, with the NHS was targeted, and it will get into the sphere where sort of large systemic companies that we rely on to deliver whatever it is, power or actually I'll be all right because I'm having solar fitted. But anyway, they'll be hacked and attacked, and it's a bigger, as you say, it's kind of a bigger problem than just insurance. And the other side of it, just from the client's point of view, is that they certainly don't want money when it happens. They need advice and service. So I agree with you that there is an opportunity there. If you get, not for the really big stuff, but let's say for our size of company, where we obviously rely on the technology and we have a lot of data, and it would be disruptive, maybe not fatal, if we were to not be able to access it. What we'd be looking for is a service of expertise to say, okay, what do I need to think about? And some of the things that came out of that were, well, how do you deal with that immediately? So how do you assess the problem? Because none of us are IT experts, and even the IT experts don't know everything all the time. And then there's a PR side of things. Quite often, journalists will look on the dark web, they'll find out that a company's been hacked, and so you'll start to get a lot of press inquiries around whether you have or haven't. So there's a whole range of different things that need to be thought about, not just the actual specifics around the technicalities, rather, around the attack and what it means. So it was really interesting.
Yeah, I think it is. I think it's funny because it's grown up as an insurance product, and it was developed as an insurance product. But I think Beazley was first in, and I think CFC as well were onto this service aspect of it, because they can't cover everything in some of these claims because they're huge, and this sort of systemic, really, is it really an insurance product? Is it suitable for an insurance product? I still think is the question, because if you have some of the larger attacks that we've talked about previously, they don't just hit one system, they hit all the systems around the world. So it's like a pandemic on a computer. It's not it's not something that insurance is there really is able to cover. So you end up working kind of at the fringes, but even at the fringes, they're still saying, well, we're going to, it's still tough, and we're maybe not losing money. So rates are going to have to rise substantially for this. And then you have a kind of customer issue, which I suppose is, would we pay for that expensive insurance, or would we do something else? And I don't know. It's a very complex field. I think if you've got highly sensitive data and your business is entirely dependent upon that, and a hack would kill you, dead. You would pay, I suppose. But as you say, what are you paying for? Money or just the ability to handle the PR at the point of the event? Feel like it's like the war on drugs somehow. The hackers are always slightly ahead of everybody, and probably quite some way ahead of the insurance industry, I imagine. It's very, very difficult, I think, in these fast moving areas where there's so little understanding of the kind of dark arts of some of these things, and on the other side, really, the criminal side is so, and some of these are governments, of course, so little sense of, there's kind of no sense of responsibility. It's not a typical insurance claim isn't always a criminal act. You know what I mean? It's just a weather event or something, which is just kind of.
Yeah.
So almost what I'm saying is the more you do, the more the insurance does in a way, the more the hackers look at it and go, fantastic, we can exploit the process because they can see how cumbersome it is and keep ahead of it.
Yeah, definitely. So that was a bit of an insight there. And then I just thought we'd touch on some of the kind of positive outcomes. I mean, we put the conference together to try and enable positive change. And I think there was a lot of positivity around. There was definitely a lot of energy in the room. I think for me, that there was more talk about people, leadership, culture, that bringing in the next generation of claims talent, those types of themes. And I think there is now an understanding that tech is not going to provide the silver bullet to cure everything. It's going to be how do you create a claims-centric organization that is enabled by technology to deliver a superior claim service, rather than how can technology deliver a superior claim service. So I thought that for me was interesting. I definitely thought that there was a kind of a challenge to the audience to really push forward the value of claims within their organization. There's an opportunity now, I think, right at this moment, as we start to return to the office, and the claims as a profession can go back to their boards and their organizations and go, look at the value that we've delivered over the pandemic. Look how hard we've worked. And these are some of the investments that we need in order to make our organizations claims centric and customer focused in the future. And then the final thing that we've talked about, and coming back to your opening statement, is kind of how service orientated do you want to be, or how much do you want to go down the contract route? This is a legal document. You're either covered or you're not, or we are a financial services organization and we'll deliver you a service, and these are the types of things we'll deliver. So I thought it was a good event and some interesting stuff that came out of it.
Yeah, I think if we do, whatever we do now going forward, we should stop starting with the operational stuff. We should start with what's the ambition and where do we get this thing into the boardroom? What's the voice of claims? Because I think it is about rethinking what we do, but not starting the rethink from what systems have we got and what have we got to replicate, which I know has been said before, but I think that's what does happen inevitably, which is we get caught up on this. I think a lot of the obstacles are self-made obstacles in a way. They're not necessarily real obstacles. And the example of the restaurant I gave was they didn't start with a technical piece. They started with the people piece and said, well, it's all about the hierarchy and the culture and how we make it work and the sort of vision of what we want to achieve. So if you take a couple of points that have been made, which is the customer expectations. What are those customer expectations? What's the number 1, 2, and 3 that we've got to do? Jonathan Clark was on here. He said, "Well, we're here to pay, right?" So maybe that's what we all talk about. So consistency comes through, and then you start to really deliver that, and not start that argument from, oh well, I wonder whether the system that we buy next week or next year or in 10 years' time is going to pay in 2 days, 3 days, 5 days, or 4 days, and how will that actual settlement process work through the digital spine, et cetera, et cetera? That's a whole paragraph or two of speaking before you've even got to the delivery. Instead of saying, let's just pay somehow, which obviously insurers can do. The obstacles are not having the technology, if you see what I mean. You can get on with it and stop, talking about all this tech. Julia Graham put it quite well. She said, I think we're behind from AirMix, we were behind on the technology, she thinks, her sense of London, which is, wow. Yeah, I think that'd be right. We are behind on the technology. And then the other one was, though, she said, we're just not meeting customer expectations. But I don't think I'd have put the first one, I'd have put the customer one first and say, well, if we don't understand them, let's start with that. Let's say the start of a conference like this in future is we've got people want to be paid quicker, or they want to get communicated with better. So this is what we're doing. Those two things could be done now. They don't need a modernization program.
No, definitely. And actually, just in the technology session, I was just looking down here at notes, that all the speakers in there were keen to stress that technology was only an enabler of business solutions and not the solution in itself. So I think even Ian from Guidewire, who I've got a lot of time for that company, stood up and said, listen, we're only here to understand what your problems and challenges are, because we'll then be able to help you. And I think it's then for the claims community to start that conversation, as you're saying, Ben, from what are they trying to do, rather than how are we doing it now, and how do we put an electronic wrapper around it or whatever.
Well, I think a technology company, fundamentally sells technology to make a profit. And, that's true of Guidewire or any of these organizations. But of course, they know what side their bread is buttered and all that sort of thing. And they are coming round quite rightly to the fact that actually we've got to sort of focus on the customer needs, and we've got to decide what those are, because I think their frustration is the same as mine, really, which is if we can't get the organizations that own the product to work out what they've got to do with this, then who's going to do it? And I think to an extent, even the technology companies are doing some of the work for these insurers to say, well, I think these are the needs and this is what they're looking for, and so on and so forth, which is not necessarily the right way around. But they realize if they don't do that, then they're just going to not be as successful in the future commercially. They can't just keep on selling products. So I don't know. I think you've got to just get to this point at which the ambition grows more, to be much greater than it currently is. And that's about, I think, as Matthew Moore said, getting it into the boardroom and convincing senior executives that this is worth it. And you won't convince them with the they won't convince them about the operational angle, because they don't care about that. I mean, from a cost perspective, but that's not really doing it.
Right. Very good, Ben. I think they're just about to start drilling through my floor. So I think I've just about got away with that. So what are you doing this weekend? I'll start. I'm having so I was saying to Ben earlier that I'm having some solar panels fitted, hence all the banging, crashing and drilling. I'm just hoping I've made the right decision. Anyway, they're working relatively hard, and they brought the sun, so you never know.
Yeah, well, it'd be good. It's going to be interesting to see how much it saved you if it couldn't go entirely off grid.
Yeah, we will see. Step one, Ben. Let's just see if it works first. And they haven't put the foot through the roof.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I know. I'm more power to your elbow before the COP summit in a few weeks. It's a good thing to do. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's excellent.
I'm
not having solar panels put in. I'm going to go cycling on Sunday, and that's it. But it's turned a bit chilly, hasn't it? But it's warming again. Again.
I'm actually dropping my kids off at Anglesey. It's half term next week, so they're in Anglesey. And actually, I've just realised I'm not here next week.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a half term next week. We'll have to have a half term break.
Yeah. Then we'll have some guests, haven't we? We've got some guests coming up.
Then we've got some guests lined up, so that's good. Right. Thanks everybody for tuning in, and we shall see you in a couple of weeks' time.
Have a great weekend. Bye.
Bye.